Carmel County School District 2 work session to order. Will you guys please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approve the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right, as you can see, there's only 2 items on the agenda. Number A is to discuss the board evaluation and to work on setting some 2021 board goals. And the second one is to discuss the upcoming legislation and some potential budget issues that may create. Obviously, Dr. Copeland has a handout there for us when we get to that. The first part about the board evaluation, obviously there's some policies there about board governance 1.01. Talks about commitment of board members and such. But the last one, number 5, is that the board will monitor its progress. It says process, but I think it means progress and performance annually. And then 1.01 E1 goes into a little more detail about what a board self-evaluation is supposed to be, what the purposes are. And it's kind of a 2-part. The evaluation portion is about the whole board, and then each of us reflects on our portion of the board. But it states that the reasons for the board self-evaluation are to develop focus on improving student achievement, to promote the concept of accountability, to ensure regular and honest review of the board's own performance, to assess successes and failures, to identify strengths and areas for improvement, to provide a framework for goal setting, and to enhance the purpose of the evaluation. And lastly, to keep the public informed. As I said, there's individual and the whole board portion. We haven't done that yet for this year. I think we did it last year as a work meeting. And so I hope it wasn't too confusing to anybody, that we weren't, I guess, expecting to have that done or have you have it done by this meeting. What I hope to do is talk about it a little bit at the work session, the purpose of it, ask questions. And then what I'd really like to see is if, when we're done, in hindsight, it would have been better to have done the board evaluation first and then try to set some board goals, just to kind of see where some of our shortcomings were, but I think it'll still be fine. But by March 1st, so that's 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks from today, I guess not quite, since it's February. 2 weeks from today would be what, the 3rd? Okay, let's say by March 3rd, if each of us could complete the board self-evaluation document, and if you will scan that and send it to me in a PDF, or perhaps if you could get it to Dana, she could scan it to me if you can't scan it, or mail it to me, or whatever. And then I'll compile those, and then I hope to take a little bit of time, maybe the next board meeting even, for we're not going to have a whole work session length of it, but to disseminate it and just put it in public record that here's what we felt some issues. Any questions about the time on the board evaluation? Questions about the board evaluation?
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
The evaluation is in 2 segments. One is personal, and one is as a board as a whole. And I think we only have to send the board as a whole to you, not on our own personal.
Yeah, good point.
And also, I see that it says click here. Is this correct, Dana?
Uh-huh.
Is that one that we can fill out and then just kind of email it to the board chair?
It sure is, but you need to make sure that you save it. You can either save it first, then type it in and save it again. I did practice. I started typing things in and saved it from there as well. So maybe before you finish it, just type the first page and just make sure you save it and come back to it and that it's saved. But it is a fillable PDF. You can type in it.
Okay.
It does not self-calc, this one does not at this point self-calculate the scores. It will still require the chairman to add those all up. But
Okay, but we can't just email it.
yes,
Okay.
yes, you should be able to email the PDF. Mhm.
Good point. Yeah, any other questions about that? Good point to, yeah, you don't have to, I guess if you're just doing that, then you could just save the whole board evaluation and keep the other, and then email it and do your own, however you feel like it.
Does anyone need a hard copy?
Okay. So like I said, let's try to get those to me in 2 weeks, March 3rd. And then I'll try to have them together. I will have them together by the next board meeting. The issue with waiting until the next work session is 3 months away, maybe it's a long time down the road. So I'd rather get the feedback back to you all sooner. The second part of discussing board goals evaluation is to try to come up with some 2021 board goals, things that we would like to work on. We did not make any last year as we weren't having regular meetings and we're in the middle of that. Attached there are the 2018 and 2019 board goals. So for 2019, you know, I think this would go into a little bit of the evaluation that we doing that or not. Number one was to be more attentive in all attendance areas, be that, you know, attend extracurricular activities, parent-teacher conferences, programs, banquets. Board members communicate with administrators the best time to visit classes and not disrupt daily instruction. Evidence of accomplishment on that area was to each board member visit a function or activity for each school at least once per year. I think the attention was that was outside of the regular board meetings. And number two there was to review the board evaluation process, which is the stuff we just talked about, the board governance policy tab 1.01-E1 to ensure board is focusing on the relevant duties and responsibilities for this district. View that policy tab, be prepared to make suggestions. We'll discuss and review board governance policy at the September work sessions. And the evidence of accomplishment was we'll discuss, review, make changes if deemed necessary to that tab at that September board work session. So, looking at the board evaluation assessment, it did get revised at that September 16th, 2019. I don't really know what changes. Do you have any recollection, any of you, about what changes may or may not have been made at that time? But we did review them, or we must have made some edits because it was reviewed at that time. That's the date. So
There were some edits made. They were fairly small.
I would say that probably happened.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of it, you know, working towards campuses, we certainly got kind of thrown off on that this last year. We can't even, we've chosen not to go there even for the board meetings, to not interact, make a bunch of extra cleaning.
Are we gaining any on that, or is that still kind of the status quo?
So far, it's a status quo. They do updates, once a month. They have changed some capacity numbers and things like that.
But as far as us coming into a classroom or something, that's still probably something I've shied away from for the time being.
Yeah, we haven't really changed the fact that we don't encourage outsiders to come in during the day. You know, we're not saying we prohibit everybody from coming in. Not, parents will allow in that sort of thing. But we have not allowed outside groups, and it has limited things like the little basketball leagues, the little wrestling leagues.
Yeah.
We're not able to come in and use our facilities this year.
So going forward, set, one of the things I asked in the email I sent out that we were gonna meet on Monday, which I appreciate Dana reminding me that this meeting was on Wednesday. I hope that benefited somebody else, but I know it didn't. So, anybody have any thoughts on some kind of major areas to make some board goals for this coming year?
I just had a thought, because they've been having so many of the Thursday trainings and stuff, maybe we add that right as and more trainings.
Are you talking about the board trainings for
The School Board Association?
Yeah. What are they doing those every Thursday at noon or
It
something?
has been.
Which I haven't done any of them, but they are recorded, so I was planning to go back. Listen to it. It's just not a good time for me to do it, but.
It's a lot easier to put them off when they're Zoom than if there's one in Casper or one in Riverside, like that, where you get attendance of those. But with Zoom, where nobody else is on there to hold you accountable, it's a lot easier to just keep working. Any other suggestions? I thought I had, and wouldn't know how to word it, but is, as we face potential budget issues, just to make sure we try to encourage as much community and parent input as possible. Obviously, we just encourage that because we'll get presented a budget and ideas. That's not our job to make that. At least something around those lines.
So do we have much participation on Zoom, when these meetings are?
Usually less than 10 viewings, and I don't know if they watch the entire thing.
Right.
Any other thoughts, comments for board goals for the coming year? We've had that number one, to be more attention in all attendance areas for a couple years in a row. I don't know that it really applies now, so.
We hope it could apply
I
next
hope
year.
it can next year, but. Yes, we hope.
I know WSBA is still wanting to do meet the legislator, meet or talk to your legislator, thing coming up in March in person. They're still hoping to do that. I don't guess they've made a final decision, but that tells me that next year they maybe are hoping to get back to doing in-person meetings, which probably are more effective, like you said.
Yeah, I hope so. Any other? No, everybody speak up at once.
I was just gonna say, and this is just my personal opinion, but we had on there attend parent-teacher conferences. I'm not sure that any of us ever did that, so I'm not sure if that should be a goal, because if we're not even trying to do it, then I don't know. Which right now, obviously, we're not, we wouldn't be doing it anyway, but.
Well, that's kind of the hardest thing is trying to figure out how we can be more outgoing to all of our schools without going into our schools. you know, or supporting teachers or supporting the students when realistically, we can't even be around. That's kind of the hard thing, you know, is how do we get better at that?
I was gonna say, those are not bad goals. Basically, what the goal is for board members to be a little more visible at even in schools and communities where they're not normally gonna go to things. And I still don't think that's a bad goal for the upcoming year. I mean, obviously, that's gonna be dependent on some things out of our control, but still, you know, I don't think that's necessarily a bad goal to have. It just all got kind of off the tracks this last spring and this year.
Feels like last 10 years. Who's last for that?
Any input from administrators, principals about, you know, that topic of goals for the board? Things that will be helpful, things to work on.
I think those goals being more visible, being active in the different schools throughout the district are good goals, but this year especially it's been hard to reach those goals because being able to be in the buildings and have visitors in the buildings has been one of our things that we haven't been doing. So I think those are good goals to have and something that might continue.
And I think just the open communication that board members have with administrators is nice. If you're approached by a community member with a problem and the board member always usually redirects the person to the principal or to a teacher or something. It's just nice to have that open dialogue with the administrator. I feel like that's definitely a strength in our district.
So for 2021, it's kind of something like, so obviously with a hint of optimism, if we left that goal number 1 up there, or we could rephrase it, or we could put it out. I think that's, and the one thing about that is it's fairly easy to have some evidence that, you know, have you done that or not?
Anybody is welcome to come run the clock at a game. I can totally hook you up with getting into a basketball game if you want to run the clock.
The only bad thing about that, Karen, is you know, people are, you know, part of being there is so people can come talk to you. If you're running the clock.
People talk to me all the time. They yell at me and tell me I need to do better all the time.
More communication.
Yeah.
And then, you know, in 2018, we had 3 goals, so it's not like it has to be 1 or 2. I think it needs to be narrow enough to focus on.
I agree that, you know, when restrictions are loosened, I would like to see us visible, you know. I mean, other than parent-teacher conference, because with 2 kids that are teachers, the last thing they want is one of us wandering around with their parent-teacher conference going on. But as far as, you know, attending different events that are going on, just to be visible, I think is a good goal.
Yeah, all right, maybe we can strike that part. Although I've only went once up to we only had one when it was at the middle school. They didn't seem to mind you coming in here as much. The elementary, it was pretty good, but the middle school, high school, they're like, hey, somebody to talk to. It wasn't quite so bad.
I think it would benefit also our students if occasionally you guys could come in and have lunch with them. Just sit in there and, you know, I've been there a while, and the folks that go through and came from the police department that actually come up and have lunch, I invite all of them too. But only certain ones take me up on it. They learn a lot. They have better rapport with the students. You know, that would be an easy suggestion. And my school will take care of lunch for you. I can speak for the rest of them.
Yeah, that'd be a good, easy one to replace the teacher conferences with.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thanks, Mike. I think, you know, George's suggestion there about attend the trainings offered by WSBA. is that, does it need to be specific enough to say WSBA Georgia, or is it just?
I don't think it needs to be specific. I mean, obviously, if anything, like you need to educate yourself in the education realm of things, but I mean, WSBA is just an easy.
So that could be a sub, so if it, I don't know, how would you word that goal, maybe?
Well, we kind of had it before, I think. I mean, it was under number 2 on the 2018 goals as participating in education opportunities and workshops. But, it was under that board of trustees will hold itself to the highest standard possible out of respect to the school and communities.
Okay. So if that was the headline goal right there instead of a sub goal, it just says board members will participate in education opportunities, workshops offered to them as a goal for this coming year. And we can have sub headings like attend WSBA training and legislative forum.
And that's functional, it is.
It is, but, and then, I don't know, did any of you guys get there was the school board magazine?
Or the NSBA,
Yeah. They'll read
I
that.
did that.
Right. And that's optional for everybody, you can't get it. So, you know, a few of those things could be sub bullets under there. Any thoughts about evidence of accomplishment? Attend at least one WSBA training per year.
Training, workshop.
Whatever.
I have a question.
Yeah.
There's some points awarded if you attend so many of those WSBA. What are the points for? You know, what is that deal? Is that evidence of attendance, or what do you use those for?
Awesomeness.
By a Coke, a candy bar?
It's almost like a reward, and it's to show that you have, you know, cumulatively over the years, you know, achieved, you know, a certain place.
I just know like the
Recognition.
fall conference is when they usually do those, right?
Right.
So like if you've attended like any of the conferences that WSBA does now for doing these trainings, then you get these points and then they'll state your name and do they put your name on a plaque or something or?
Yeah.
Or however many points you've earned throughout.
There's different levels for numbers of points, so, you know, I don't know, there's a level for so many points, and then you get to the next level after you get an extra set, you know, so many points, and it just goes up from there, and then boards are honored for all of their members attaining a certain level, maybe, you know, they're recognized as a board of distinction or something at some of these activities. It's a little harder to explain when you haven't had a chance to go, and I didn't have it this year, you know, the WSBA thing, because that's where you go to those and get training, but also you see the awards they give out and they announce the levels of board members. But it's just kind of a way to show that you put in time to learn things about board member responsibilities, how schools work, you know, kind of thing, what your role is. But yeah,
But they don't count towards the tenure.
Just both individual and full board.
yeah,
They offer awards or recognition for both individual board members, number of points, or boards as a whole, if they reach so many points, or have everyone of their board members participate.
Thank you. So we can write those back up and send them out for review. Comment. there's two. You know, I don't know if we need the budgetary stuff on there. I mean, obviously, we're gonna, listen and do that, so. I don't know if we need it specifically as a goal or not. And I don't really know how to word it if it was. It's just an upcoming issue. Any thoughts on that before we move on? Are we comfortable with those two goals?
Well, other than the, to get community input on the issue, I'm not sure that, like you said, that should be a board goal or not. I guess that would be a communication.
Okay. All right, we'll leave it at those two and try to write it up and get them back out. And then, if we, again, like I said, 2 weeks to have the board evaluations back to me, and then I'll get them together so you can see them before the next board meeting. Okay, that's all I had on the board goals and board evaluation piece. Dr. Copeland, if you want to talk about budget issues, legislative update.
All right, first I'll just start with some of these bills and just kind of summarize some of the ones that school people, superintendents specifically, are kind of keeping up with that could affect schools. These are certainly not all of them. You can go on the Wyoming legislative page and you can see the bills that are there, that have been filed, whether they have been assigned to committee, kind of what their status is, how much they would affect the fiscal. There's usually like a fiscal note, how much that would either add or save money for the state. So there's a lot of information on there. So if you have specific questions that I'm either not able to answer or Sally's not able to answer, because I know she keeps track of some of these also that have to do with finance, we can also go in there and check and read a little more in detail. I did just make copies of these, so I doubt you've had time to go over and read all through these because these are worded like bills are supposed to be worded. But just a couple of things. The recalibration bill, I did put a copy of the one that came out of that committee that's been filed. It's in part 1 and 2 on here because it was a little too big. I couldn't get it to all scan in one scan. But that's all part of one bill. I think it's House Bill 61. Is that correct, Sally?
Yes.
And this was the one that they worked on quite a while. The recalibration is a process, as you remember, it's required every 5 years. They can do it more often, which they actually did this last 5 years. They did one in 2017, I think. And then they didn't adopt that, I don't think, either. So then this one was done because it's required in statute to do it every 5 years. So 2015, 2020, 2025, so. And what that is, they look at all the components required, which a lot of this terminology, if you've been to things, you've heard. If not, it may be new, but what's called a basket of goods. Everything that the state requires a public school district to provide are called, or it has been referred to as the basket of goods. So if they require, English language arts to be taught K through 12, that's a piece or a part of the basket of goods, and that takes so much money to fund that. So the recalibration basically looks at that. They look at what's in there. They look at how much money it takes to fund those things that they're requiring of school districts, and then they can adjust every 5 years. So they can either take components out or they can add components in. For example, the latest one I think I remember them adding in is the required computer science that's required now as a requirement. So in starting the year 2022, there will be computer standards that will be taught K through 12 and a computer science standards at the high school level that's offered that have to be covered. So that's the latest thing they added to the basket of goods. The other side of that is whatever they put in or take out, how does that affect the funding they provide? And they hire outside consultants usually to come up and do this whole recalibration process. And what's the name of the one that always, Picus and Ogden? That's the one that they normally have used through all of these 5-year recalibrations. They're consultants that do this nationwide for numerous states. And they look at the basket of goods, they say, this is how much this is going to cost. They do salary studies like they did this last time. They do supply and demand of teachers, you know, how easy it is to get teachers, all kinds of things they look at to decide how much this is going to cost the state of Wyoming to fund this basket of goods that they are requiring. So that's just in kind of a nutshell how the process works. And in 2015, they didn't really adopt the true recalibration model. They had what they call a legislative model because they wanted to fund some things that they didn't fund, and they didn't want to cut some things they recommended to cut. So they just adopted the legislative model. In 2017, they thought they would hired a different consultant, and their theory generally was that they would have a different group look at this, and hopefully it would save some money. And what happened in that recalibration that was out of sync, and by a different set of consultants, it actually came back that they weren't funding enough to cover the basket of goods. So that really wasn't what they wanted to hear, so they didn't adopt any of that, right, Sally? Right. So now they went back in 2020, last fall, to Picus and Ogden again, and they have put forth a recalibration. Now, because we're in the budget situation we are in Wyoming with coal, mainly coal is the real problem, the drop in the coal production and demand. And then, because basically in Wyoming, that's what has funded the state's expenditures, the vast majority of the state's expenditures for the last several decades. So as that has been changing, the demand and the requirements and the environmental, all of that that's affected that, the demand has gone down. You see headlines, just like I think it was last week, another coal mine up around Gillette closed. Some have declared bankruptcy, so they're kind of in trouble. So the main revenue source that's allowed Wyoming to get way more than what individual taxpayers have to pay is on the decline. And so that's what's caused this whole budget shortfall. So now the discussion in this recalibration is that basically, there were not major cuts in the recalibration as far as what they said it was going to take to fund what Wyoming is requiring. So they've come up with 2 or 3 different ways to deal with budget shortfalls. Thoughts, not passed, nothing's been passed yet. One is that they want to save, or they decided to cut, or the needed cut was $100 million to education. So to get to that, they discussed 2 different ways to get to that cut level. One is a per ADM cut. So in other words, we're going to cut every student funding, average daily membership, that's each student. So our ADM is, and I'm simplifying it because there's a lot of other little pieces to this, but our ADM is usually around 600, somewhere give or take in the last couple of years. So a per ADM cut of whatever it is, we would just multiply that times the 600 or whatever our ADM is calculated to be, and that's our cut. The other thing they talked about was just a straight percentage cut. So every district gets this percent cut. They decided for whatever reason, Sally may know a little more about this, to go with the per ADM cut recommendation that came out of all of this. And that's where I think I've talked a little before about our cut based on that particular suggestion would be around $650,000 for next year. And I'm not sure why they came to that cut. Sally, do you know any background between that and the percentage? The percentage would have been more for us.
Right, and they felt that the per student cut was more equal. You know, as far as big districts, little districts, not recognizing the fact that, you know, $1,000 to a little district is more than $1,000 to a big district. But they figured by spreading it by ADM, that was more equal, is what I heard.
And the other thing you have to remember too, just about smaller districts is bigger district, you might have heard the term economy of scale. In other words, if you can afford a teacher for every 22 kids, Cheyenne can put 22 kids in classrooms. We can't put 22 kids in Hannah Elementary. We don't have 22 per grade. So they have the economy of scale where a teacher can teach more kids at the same grade level with the same prep as a comparison. So there's a lot of differences across Wyoming, with all of this. So that's kind of what's come out of recalibration, and whether there'll be a lawsuit over all of this or not, like there were lawsuits back in, when were the lawsuits? The 90s, or the 2000s?
2004, 5, 6.
The Campbell lawsuits where district sued the state, said you're not funding what the model's requiring. And so there could be some lawsuits, of course, out of all of this too, with cuts. You just don't know where that's going to go. There is a coalition of districts that watch that basically, about 12 districts, I think, in the state that are really watching closely and have kind of threatened, well, if we don't think they're funding adequately, which the Constitution requires in Wyoming, the basket of goods, then we're going to sue the state. And the state lost several of those lawsuits back in, and they had to come up with more money. And that's when they came in with the consultants and got it all kind of scientific. So that's where we are on recalibration. Sally may want to speak to any big changes in the model. I'm not sure if there's any major ones really from what we've been used to.
Basically, the bill that's presented, House Bill 61, is the current funding model as far as the components and the dollar amounts assigned to the components, the FTEs, the AGMs, the dollar amounts assigned to supplies, materials, to teacher salaries, to technology applied to maintenance and operation. Everything's basically the model as it is, the legislative model. And they didn't put in any of the consultants' recommendations because Picus and Auden, their cost-based model came back higher than the legislative model. It's finally, after since this is the 4th time that this model has been recalibrated, the legislative model and the Picus and Auden model have merged. They're basically really close together to where they're funding the same amount of money. And now it's even reversed, whereas before the legislative model was providing more money and Auden's model was less, they've come together to where Auden's model is now a little bit more than the legislative model. Well, the legislature doesn't want to hear that because they're cutting, they need to cut money. So that's why they came in with this per ADM cut of $100 million. And they found that the easiest way to get to that was to take $100 million, divide it by the statewide ADM, and then pro-rata it out to the schools based on their ADM. About $1,052, $1,035 per student cut.
Sally, did they leave the insurance change in there where they only fund?
They left the insurance, they left everything. They put this bill forth to get a starting point to talk, was what they said. They didn't change anything, not even health insurance or anything like that. Now, and I haven't seen a bill that they wanted, there's been talk about pulling health insurance out of the model and doing it on a reimbursement basis, which would cost us about $400,000, between $300,000 and $400,000 as far as health insurance funding compared to what we spend. Because we spend a little bit less, believe it or not, on health insurance than what the model funds us. And that has to do with the number of FTEs for personnel, the full-time equivalencies. I'm sorry, I'm trying to not talk in acronyms. The full-time equivalently staffing provides so much per staff, and we don't have that many staff. But we're so close to the model that any changes don't impact us a whole lot.
The insurance would, because right now they fund it per FTE or kind of the staff number you're allotted, whether they take it or not. And we have some of our employees that are not taking the health, and they choose not to because they're on their spouse or for whatever reason. But yet we reckon that that's where the 400,000 less if it goes to actual as opposed to just FTE based on your total. So.
Yeah. So in our district, we have about 18 to 20 staff members that do not take our health insurance because their spouse's insurance is better, better coverage, has better deductibles, etc. So that would be our loss, about $20,000 for 20 people, $20,000 would be about $400,000.
So since that's a block model, anything like that is cut, we will have to cover that with something else that we're not spending on that right now. So that can affect us like that. And then just to go on a little bit, so that's where we are with recalibration. The House Education Committee, of which Jerry Paxton is the chair this year, which is a very good thing because he's very pro-education, pro-public school, being a former principal and from Camet, one of our communities, and has relatives and grandkids going to our school. So we really have lucked out a little bit that Jerry's the chair of that because they do have some control over what's discussed and kind of how it progresses. We will get some kind of recalibration passed, some kind of model passed. What's happening now though, so that 650,000 that's projected right now for our cut, Representative Harshman, who is from the Casper area, has been past Speaker of the House, is pretty sure that's what it's going to be. He's a pro-education legislator. There are some that would like to be bigger cuts that have been elected and that are part of the legislature. So we're just having to watch all of the various things. One thing that's been now introduced is House Bill 89, which I did attach to your board docs. And that is coming at cuts from a different direction than just an across the board per ADM or percentage. That is cutting some of the components in the model. So some of the things that are cut in House Bill 89, and Sally can jump in anytime if I misspeak or say something or leave something out, but it cuts the allotment we get for principal positions. It cuts the superintendent allotment, which most districts are over on all of those, but it cuts those. And the biggest cut in there that would affect us by far the most is it cuts activities allotment basically in half. So that would be about $215,000 in our case out of activities. We get about 430 according to Sally, and then we add some to that because we've had talked before about our 3 different schools with 3 different teams of things that cost a little more to do that. So needless to say, if we got a half, 50% cut in activities, we would have to immediately convene and get our activities and then figure out how in the heck what that would look like, because it would be pretty drastically different. I don't know how feasible that is if word gets out. I don't think that's going to be very popular with almost any parent in the state and most people. So I don't know how feasible it is to think that would stay in there, but that is in House Bill 89 along with those other admin position cuts. There's talk, at least this morning in the superintendent's meeting, there's talk that some might want to just amend that bill onto the recalibration bill so that make that part of it. So if that takes place, that would be above the 650,000 that we've been talking about. So bills like that would add to, our cuts. So just kind of FYI there.
I have a question real quick, Tim.
Yeah.
I'm back on the bill recalibration, the part 2. It says, so it's $100 million to cut in FY22 and each year thereafter. Does that mean a total of 300 million of cuts or just 100 that stays cut?
That
Sally.
cut would carry forward each year, wouldn't it? So it'd be 100
It
million.
wouldn't be an additional.
It's not with
100,000.
additional, that's my question.
Yeah, it's not an additional.
It's just a one-time and then your budget drops and then that's.
And it drops to that level from that.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
You would take your foundation guarantee calculation and then subtract that from it.
But just once. It's
Now,
not-
they could actually, it could be more than that.
Right.
I mean,
But
but
I wasn't
that
that clear, so.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So those, I think I added on here, I added this on here if you want to look and see those cuts for all the various school districts. You can see how it affects various ones. Sally, is there anything I've left out of just general recalibration information? I don't want to go into, we've gone into a little detail, but.
Both the House and Senate Education Committees meet Thursday, the 25th. The House meets at 8 o'clock by Zoom, and the Senate meets at 8:30. Whether that
that's designed or not, we don't know. Because they'll both be meeting at the same time, so you can't listen to both of them at the same time. But if you're interested in the discussion and what's going on with those bills, it would be interesting to go in there to their YouTube and listen to them. I drive the office crazy because I have the legislature on all the time in my office. So, you know, and if Dr. Copeland said that Jerry Paxton may want us to testify on how certain things would impact our district specifically. And when we know, you know, what that needs to be, then we'll be happy to testify in front of the committee and let them know that a 50% activity cut would impact our district in this way. You know, it would mean maybe we don't have junior high activities, and it might mean that we have to combine some teams. It might mean that maybe we're going to go ahead and have our activities and take the money from another place in the model and fund activities at the level we currently do. That's why it's a block grant. Just because they're cutting the funds doesn't mean that it's going to cut something specifically, because it is a block grant and you as a board can decide where the money goes.
Can you say what times those were again, what day, what time?
8 o'clock on the 25th for the House and 8:30 on the 25th for the Senate Education Committees. And if you go to WyoLeg, WYOLEG.gov, that'll bring you to the legislative home site, and then you can go there and look at the calendar and get into the link for those meetings as they happen.
They'll have agendas on there. People can testify also. That's what Sally and I were talking about. I'll reach out to Jerry and see if they have enough people that represents things to testify to how it would affect, and offer if he would like us to be part of that. And either Sally or I could make some comments there, depending on what he feels like points should be made. But there's already quite a few I know of that are already planning to testify, board members and superintendents and others. Brian Farmer from WSBA normally testifies, on behalf of school boards also. So, we don't want to overkill and repeat the same thing. So that's why I want to reach out to Jerry and see if they have enough or if he needs somebody or whatever. We are a little unique in the activities deal because we have 3 schools. Not every district has, there's some others that are like us, but not that many that have multiple high schools. So that would affect us differently than districts that just have the one high school and one junior high.
So on that page, the amount of cuts, it's clear too that the per ADM, an equal per ADM reduction is a lot better for us than
Yes.
Percentage. Real quick, and I apologize if this is a dumb question, but sitting here looking at the different towns and school districts, Fremont County has 8 school districts in it. And is there a reason why?
There's probably a historical reason.
And is there a reason why?
That does get into that consolidation bill, just so we're talking about numbers of school districts and all. That's House Bill 77. I put that on there. That's also put in the Education Committee. There is a group that's really pushing this. They're basically saying that it would save money to have 23 districts, one for each county, with 1 board and 1 superintendent and 1 business manager and this and that and the other. And then the 24th district would be the reservation, would have their own district. Probably because that has to do with federal funding that's outside of the state funding. There's lots of discussion about that one right now, especially among superintendents and just across the state. They did a white paper about 2016 or 17, because when it came out, we had some residents, some of our patrons that sent input into that time. But supposedly the consolidation of districts like that would save about $7 million. That was what they projected out of how many $100 million budget of education. So fairly minimal savings, but everybody's got it kind of in their head, especially group of senators that are pushing this, that's going to save a bunch of money if you get rid of half the superintendents and half the business managers and half the curriculum directors and so on. There's also a lot of other consequences to that. want to talk about local control and feeling like you're a part of things. There's also, you can't just, some of the points made by some of the admin groups is that you can't just subtract, like Hardin County. Let's say we go to one district and there's one superintendent for Rawlins. You couldn't just subtract one superintendent and think you're saving that amount of money necessarily, unless you just don't want a superintendent ever appearing anywhere in the district, because they'd have to have some help. Some would, they'd go to probably the bigger salary of whoever had the biggest salary. They would have to have some help to get around and hire probably associate superintendent or something, assistant, something like that. So there's a lot of question marks, and they don't even put how much that would save, because there's no guarantees how much it really would save.
One school board.
Yeah, well, it made sense, for like us, I don't think it would work because we go from bags all the way to Medicine Bow. But however, if we're looking at Lander, DuBois, Pavilion, Ethity, Fort Washakie, that it seems, just on layman's terms, it would seem that would be.
Fremont County is usually brought up when consolidation comes up as a reason. There are other parts of the state. Sheridan's usually brought up because there's 3 districts in Sheridan County. Mountain View, Lyman are very close together, like 8 or 9 miles. They're usually put out as some example. So I don't know. I also know Jerry's not, Representative Paxton's not a fan of this. His goal is not to let this get out of committee. I don't know how much really public support there would be for this, because I think there would be a lot of backlash from smaller communities that would lose basically their school board, their representation, their local control. So, but I put that in there because it is filed and it has been given to committee. So we're keeping tabs on that. I'll kind of keep you posted as I see that. And then just very quickly on the others before we get to the stand up, I want to spend a few minutes on. There's a repeal of gun-free zones. This has been filed a couple of sessions now, but there's a Senate bill and a House bill that's been filed. It's basically repeals schools as gun-free zones. So while we would still have control over our employees as far as carrying firearms, but public parents, they could come to games, it would just basically take away the gun-free zone. So that's just an FYI. It hasn't passed, but it has gained a few votes each time. So this could be the year, but that's out there. That would definitely affect schools in that area. The kindergarten start date, that just sets it at August 1. It doesn't give you anybody the right to your birthday. Right now the law is if your kid's birthday is between August 1 and September 15th, they can take that assessment deal, and if they're ready, if they're deemed ready by passing that assessment, they can go ahead and start. This just basically says if you're not born by August 1st, you don't start. Clarifies it does not give that exception. Education options, I don't think that would cost the state more money in a time when they're not. Basically, that says homeschool. It's a kind of a backdoor voucher thing, and it gives some money to school districts probably to try to gain a little more support for that than there has been in the past. It would give an allotment to homeschool parents, to anybody that's not going to public schools. It would give them, I think, half, and the other half would go to the local district. So in other words, we'd get ADN for half. I've not talked to anybody that's for that. It's kind of like opening a Pandora's box. It might look good for a year. Number one, the state didn't have the money to do it. Number two, it might start out getting a little bit of extra money for school districts, but then where would it go from there? So anyway, that would affect. So anybody have questions on any of these bills? You can read them. There's rationales, there's funding, there's all kinds of different things you can read about it. So, but feel free to reach out to Sally or I, either one, about questions that you see or any new bills that come up for that matter. I think that you have this in front of you, and it's called non-personnel cuts being considered or discussed or whatever. So the A team has been meeting and talking about where we could planning at least to get, kind of have a plan for the 650. That could go up or down, we might have to adjust some of our thinkings, but I wanted to kind of give you an update on where we are. I kind of broke this out by campus just to kind of make it easy to keep track of it, because as an A team, we started out by talking about what could be cut on their campus and they thought, would have the least effect. So obviously, everybody's first goal is to affect students the least. So here are some non-personnel cuts that we've kind of put together, added up, then I had the principals go back and look at them and rank them. You know, yeah, these would be my first choices. Those are in yellow for cuts. The blue or kind of aqua color, you know, would be a secondary one, but could be considered. They just rank the yellow ones first. So as you go through here, you see some commonalities about textbook budgets, reducing the technology budget, reducing the tutoring district-wide. So just a little bit of background, summer school's on there. So right now, we have summer school for non-SPED students that this funds. We don't usually spend all of this. The elementary principals have talked about the effectiveness of how we've done summer school in the past. We did not cut summer school for secondary schools because that has to do with credit recovery. We need those kids to be able to come in and get on Edgenuity and be to recover credit so they can be on track for graduation, see if they didn't pass the course that's required. So that's why you will see that summer school budget item on the elementaries, but not the secondaries, because we did leave some money in the secondary ones just for that specific reason. High school students that needed it in order to graduate. So the summer school budget, that's just how much was budgeted for each campus. In the past, it used to be called the Bridges Grant. It was put inside the model a couple of years ago. So the northern elementaries, that represents about $10,000. You see that's a blued out or aqua one because, you know, if possible, Lord would like to keep a little of that for some summer school help with the kids. The textbook budget, we have budgeted a sum each year. We normally do not spend it, but it's in the budget. So we're talking about cutting budget. So it is in there to play with, and so we didn't reduce it all. The total textbook budget was about $109,000. We reduced it down by about 90 or 93, somewhere in there between 90 and 95,000. We left some in there for kind of backups. We needed to order some things that were unforeseen. Also to pay for some course-connected resources that were required, especially in the secondary. So we did leave some in that textbook. So this does not represent all of it. How I figured out how I took the amount, let's say it was 95,000, which I think that's pretty close to what we talked about cutting. I divided that by our ADM, which let's say it was 600, it wasn't quite that, let's just say 600. I got an amount per student, and then I basically multiplied that out by each campus as ADM. So the northern elementaries are, of course, Medicine Bow, Elk Mountain, and Hannah Elementary. So you do that with textbooks, and that's a savings or a reduction of $12,378 for the northern elementaries. The tech budget, this is not near the entire tech budget. We normally have about $100,000 that we have as a tech budget that we use for kind of backups if we have server or needs or to replace laptops. Basically, I reduced that just again as kind of a talking starting point by about 60,000. So it's not all of it. Plus, that's not the only tech area in the budget. That's just that one. It's $100,000 and kept there. We don't always spend it. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we spend a little more than that, probably, depending on the need. But that's a reduction again. Divided out northern campuses, that's about 78-17 there. If this reducing tutoring, that's basically most of that budget. That is for things like, Sally could kind of remind me, that's for things like some after school tutoring during the school year. It's not summer school, but it's during the year. What else is that?
Well, if you hired a tutor, which under the funding model definition of a tutor is a certified teacher. So if you hired a certified teacher to be a tutor across the district, that's what's budgeted.
That's
We've
where.
never had a teacher be a certified tutor, and that's all they do is tutor.
And some years we use more of that than others, but that just represents most of that. One reason that we put that in there is we have one pocket of money that's still to come, and maybe more than that, but at the federal level, they passed the latest CARES Act, just before December 31st last year. We haven't gotten the final amount of that, what we're going to get, or exactly what it can be used for, but I know it can be used for tutoring or filling gaps of kids that have gaps from that school closure and all the kind of the way we've had to do things last spring and then this year with some of the ones in CBBE. So that could take care of some of that. I think we're going to get around 400,000 for that. So we can use that for various things connected with COVID. That's not the bill they're talking about right now in Congress. If they pass that one, then that will be another pocket of money that K-12 schools can get. So anyway, so you see there, Northern Elementary's 33,645 is their kind of their total right now. And I won't go through every one of these, but you can see on each page there's a campus, and then there's the amounts that are prorated out. And so bottom line, you can move through that and see all those cuts. And then on the back page, district office, I just put some cuts over there, also non-personnel kind of cuts. So the total district-wide non-personnel cuts that have been discussed and are at this point kind of recommended by the 18 total 303,380. So that's where we are right now on complete non-personnel cuts. Tonight in executive session, I have some other information that has to do with people in positions, so that's going to be for executive session. But that's I just go over this in public, public since it's non-personnel items. Be glad to answer any questions. I know it's going to take a little bit of time. We're not to the end of, this is the plan. But I wanted you to start to have some information so you can look at it, consider it. If you want to contact me anytime, email, have input. If you want to have input now, later, things come to mind. If there's other things you're thinking of, possible cuts that we're not thinking of, different perspectives are helpful in this kind of situation. So bottom line, that represents almost half of the 650. When the state comes out and says they want everybody to cut, they don't want to raise any more revenue, really. I mean, a lot of them don't. I think there's going to be some revenue figured out at some point, but we're just not quite ready to talk about it, I don't think, right now politically. But because generally they say it can't all be done by cuts, it can't all be done by raising new revenue. It's going to have to be a combination. Well, right now, all they're talking about are cuts. They're not talking really much about revenue. Beginning to have a little bit of conversation about that 1 cent sales tax that would kick in if the state savings rainy day account gets below a certain level. That 1 cent sales tax would kick in. If it gets back above that level, it would go away. And so it would kind of be an in and out kind of thing. That's getting a little more conversation than used to. But I don't know, that sales tax is not a real popular thing. Well, any taxes, I guess, are not. As we, as we talk about this, it's going to depend, the cuts they say that we're going to do, even the initial cuts, they all talk about we want cuts to be away from the classroom, basically away from personnel. There's no way to get to even the 650 without considering some personnel. I mean, you can't cut electricity. You can't cut gasoline prices. You can't cut natural gas prices. There's just things that, yeah, they might be away from the classroom itself, but you can't cut it totally out. So all of the SUPs and all of the districts are trying to get that message. Look, everybody realizes the situation we're in. We're not saying there's no way we should take any cuts at all. But it's not also realistic to think every cut they come up with, at the level they're talking about, is going to not affect the classroom nor personnel, directly affect the classroom. So that's being discussed a little more, and we'll see where all of this goes.
On some of these, even that are, the non-personnel cuts, they're only temporary anyways. For example, textbooks and uniforms is a small one, but you can't very well.
You can't cut it from now on.
From now on, yeah, that's right. It's only a delay. And then it's going to have to be personnel.
Well, and you look at these amounts and you compare it to, a typical teacher salary plus all the benefits, is approaching, 70-something thousand, as opposed to, we're going to cut, the tech budget by 60. One person is worth $77,000 in dollars to the district or not. So you can see how there would have to be a lot of these kind of cuts, you know, to equal less person cuts. So, I mean, that's just the dilemma. Everybody's in, all the districts are in, it's not just us. So, you know, budget cuts aren't fun, and they will affect people also. You know, even some of these affect the classroom indirectly.
So timing wise, from the legislature, when will you have a number that you know what that number is, roughly?
Session ends the end of March.
So will we have a number at the end of March? And then, like you say, there could be some lawsuits after that, but at that point, we need to plan for that number.
If there were lawsuits, it would take probably
4 years.
years to decide. So it wouldn't be immediate help even if the state lost that. And I'm not, you know, who knows if they would lose it. It depends on the way the lawsuit's done and the way the cuts are administered. The deadline for notifying personnel, contracted personnel, is April 15th, correct? Initial and continuing. We are talking about some things that we feel like will affect the least number of kids and the least number of programs for kids. So I guess what I'm saying is we're seriously discussing some things that I don't know that we want to wait till the end of March or the 1st of April to notify, to make some notifications. So, you know, that'll be a little clearer when we talk more in executive session, but that is the timeline. Officially, we will know, I guess, a final number. We can count on the 650 at least, is what I'm thinking. I don't think it's going to be below that.
We may know before then. It depends on when the budget bill passes and what happens with recalibration. We'll know a little bit more after the 25th when the committees decide to send something to the respective houses. But until they pass a bill or pass a law that either adopts or what they adopt for a funding model or what the governor signs, that's when we know for sure where we're at. Until the dust settles and the governor signs the law, that's when we know.
I suspect there will be, at least if it's like it has been in recent sessions, the rub will be between the House philosophy and the Senate philosophy. And they usually kind of dicker back and forth for all the time they have. I mean, before they come finally pass something at the last minute. But maybe not. It could come out earlier than that this year.
Yes, a question and something for board policy and people to think about too is cash carryover. You know, do you take all the cuts in year one versus cushion a portion of it and drop cash carryover down a little with Sally? You'll be able to tell us what position we're in to do that or not do that.
And then too, there's a question like, for example, you know, we have, because of Sally's and everybody's good management of the district for the last few years, we're basically at the limit of cash carryover. We're getting closer to the limit of depreciation reserve. Isn't there a limit on that or not?
No, it's an annual limit of how much you can.
Oh, and okay.
But we'll be close to the practical limit of what's.
Yeah. And so.
Well, we're going to use a little bit of that.
We are in a good situation as far as best we could have prepared, you know, being at the limit of cash carryover. So that does create some questions. So let's say the activity thing and all of that passed, where we're going to be reduced by that amount for admin and all that. We might have to use some cash. I don't think anybody is going to want to recommend, you know, cuts in salary. I mean, there's talk, you know, there's discussion maybe of freezing salaries. There's discussions of things and then catching up at some point. I don't know, but there could be some uses for some of that money also that will become maybe a little more apparent of what options there might be that we would maybe need to use some of that in the next 6 weeks. So there's also that.
Do we have to find out, like, I guess, if we had to cut teaching positions, do we do it before we offer them? Or can you take back them? Because don't we offer them, don't we do that next month?
Well, the deadline is April 15th. It's usually done at the March meeting because our April meeting date is usually after the 15th.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be done at the March meeting if we're still in a state of flux, but then we would have to have a special meeting, say the first week of April or sometime before April 15th.
Okay.
So it would have to be done, the April 15th is the drop dead deadline of notifying initial or continuing teachers.
And the April meeting is after that April 15th deadline, so it would
That's like on the second.
require a special meeting.
If you didn't do it in March.
And
If you didn't do it in March, you can have a special meeting.
I think you said
Okay.
it somewhere else too, like, you know, we can't shut off gas or electricity or, you know, those things are gonna continue to go through inflation, they're gonna rise anyways. Because the gas pump is already rising, so.
Yeah, you can ask Texas about it.
I will commend your buildings in your district as far as their prudent use of their utilities. They're not exceeding where we've been over the years. Their utility bills are staying pretty steady. And that's because they're shutting off the lights when they leave the rooms. They're turning the heat down. They're doing they're economizing how they're using their buildings. And so I think you need to pat your custodians and your teachers on the back that they are being prudent users of their utilities. I've noticed, I watched that.
Most thermostats are on or computer controlled now. I mean, you can have control over it, but I mean, it generally shuts it off or turns it on at appropriate times when people are in the room, that kind of stuff.
But they are being prudent of their utilities.
Transportation will continue to be funded correctly as is. At least right now, there's no change in transportation or special ed as of today.
Yeah, there's a little blurb out there about 90% of transportation.
A little bit less.
A little bit, but not much.
So I'll be glad to, I don't want to cut anybody off if you have a question or comment. Again, feel free to reach out, give your perspective on any of these or any others that you can think of or other things you might want us to throw into the discussion. But I want to say just on a kind of different topic on the survey, if I could spend a minute or two, just to give you an idea. We had, so the surveys that have done, we're actually compiling everything. And I'll probably
Specify what survey.
I'm sorry. The Culture and Climate 3-year survey that we do every 3 years. We survey parents, students, and staff, and we ask them a bunch of questions, and then they respond, and we compile the results, and hopefully use that to improve the culture and climate of each of our campuses. So I just gave today each principal their building survey results. They're going to look over those. I'll get together with each one of them. We'll talk about what that says, how that can guide us in future kind of improvement planning. But just to give you an idea, we had in students grades 3 through 6, we had 131 students fill that out of 177. In students grades 7 through 12, we had 182 students out of 266. We had 117 staff and 174 parents. So that just gives you ideas of kind of the numbers. I'll send all this out. But I have, and I will send out the district level probably the next few days to all of you board members, just so you can see. Some of the comments are, especially from students, are pretty entertaining to read through. Your best, the thing you like most about school, the thing you like least about school, those kinds of things. We had some chuckles today as we kind of went through some of those comments at the 18 meeting. But I will send out, I will send out some of that information over the next week. But I thought that was a fairly decent response for, the numbers in our district and all. And we can take some of that information. Some of the results make you feel really good. Some of it makes you kind of look at it and think, well, we need to do a better job about this thing or that thing. So you'll be getting more information. I just want to kind of throw that out there tonight. Other than that, I guess.
I did have a question for the principals again. On the potential of budget cuts, do you guys have any comments or any about concerns, staff morale issues, staff coming to, just anything you would want to share with us while we're here? Any thoughts from you guys?
They know it's coming. they're talking about it. Like, you can hear them wondering and talking, so it's in the back of the mind.
The biggest thing I would say for staff morale is the fear of the unknown. And the biggest way we can help that is to help them know what those potential cuts are. Having lived through a lot of cuts in my former district, that always helped us know these are potential cuts. We don't know necessarily how much we have to cut, but this is what our potential list of cuts are. And then we know what those cuts are coming. We may be able to cut less, or, you know, our potential number is this. To meet that, this is where it is. We may be able to cut less, and that helps morale when they know, okay, this is what that potential list is.
I think everybody needs to remember that this is going to be statewide too, so if we have to get into personnel, and we have to cut personnel, it's not like they can go to the next county and go to work, because that county is also covered. So I hope that it will be the last step we have to take.
And in regards to the northern elementaries, depending on what we end up deciding, we may be able to do some restructuring rather than actual, like, loss of positions. But again, I have to be able to know so I can get that out to them and to the communities, because I know that if we do restructure the two little schools, the community is gonna need a lot of information about that so that they feel better about it as well.
I think hopefully it helps that we went through that exercise a couple of years ago to see that it was kind of pointless financially to cut those schools just totally. So I don't see why that would have changed. So I hope those communities would have that fear in their minds.
I think
I'm sure they have
always, I think they'll always have the fear, but that's what I need to be able to reassure them is that we're not looking at closing the schools. But that they might look different next year than they do this year.
One thing you mentioned, Jim, or just, a thought that, the idea of potential freezing in salaries and then a potential makeup. I remember one time on the salary and benefits committee, I hate that idea just in general, because if it's never gonna get made up. And so, I'm not trying to pick on that. It's just the same thing, like promising something better in the future, I will make it up to you. That's never gonna happen. So I think it's better to be blunt and say, this is what's gonna happen. Not promise anything in the future, because what I noticed, I remember that 2 years ago, and some of these teachers still had resentment. Well, back 10 years ago, we had this pay freeze, and we're still waiting to catch up.
And
that's just gone. It's just gone.
It's gone. And
You kept your job.
when I said makeup, I didn't mean make up the future salary. I meant make up the money in our accounts.
Yeah.
That got us back to square one where we weren't using fund balance every year, because obviously there's a limit on that. So
And I wasn't trying to be critical of what.
You're right. That's
Promising something that'll be roses in the future will bite you in the butt.
In every district where there's ever a freeze, because there was a freeze before I came, and that's one of the things everybody's talking about when I came. Where we were frozen and we were going to get made up, and I pretty much said I doubt it.
Gotta keep your job. Okay, we got, it's about 10 minutes left of work session. We don't have to use it if there's not issues, but if you guys have any more questions or comments?
I have a question for Sally. So the funding for little schools like Elk Mountain isn't going to change. At least there's no real plans right now.
Correct. According to what's been presented to the legislature, is the same funding model that we're currently using. So that would mean that they're funding schools less than 49. It's still 7-to-1 ratio for students to teacher ratio, 7-to-1. They're still funding it that way. and one assistant principal to take care of the principal, the secretary, and the maintenance and operations. They're not going to adjust those minimums in the current legislation that's proposed. There's no adjustment for those small schools.
And that also explains why the percentage hurts us worse than the ADM, because we are protected somewhat on numbers of staff by the minimums that each school has. And that's not just affecting the amount in medicine though, but,
District-wide.
so that's why the ADM is better for us than a strict percentage, because we gain from those minimum numbers of guaranteed, positions, FTEs.
Okay, thank you.
I guess to follow up to Joe's question a little bit, Sally, there, and Jim's, I think, in general, most of us would prefer to just have a straight cut to the block model, and we decide, you guys recommend and we approve how those cuts are made. Is there any practical way that we can advocate for that, or?
You mean just maintaining the block model?
Yeah, doing whatever happens in a block model rather than fiddling with portions of it, like the health insurance, or like then picking apart. Is there anything that we can do, or even as a district, to provide, we feel like we'd rather take the cut and then us decide how that's dispersed, rather than picking apart the model.
Exactly, and that's part of the difference between House Bill 61 and House Bill 89.
Right.
In that House Bill 89 is going specifically to positions and cutting funding at position levels.
Right.
Even though, and what you might, as a public comment, and to any legislators that you know, Burkhart, Paxton, Hicks, if you know any of the other legislators around, legislators Harshman, if you know them, tell them that we're willing to put our skin in the game and take the cuts that we need to take, but please don't disturb our block funding. That we still want to be able to decide at a local level how we divide up we get, say, right now our foundation guarantee is 14.6 million. We want to say, and it goes down to 14 million even. We want to be able to decide how we spend that 14 million. You can take your 600,000 from us, take the cut, we'll take the hit, but we want to be able to decide where we prioritize and where that money goes. And that's what the block grant does for you, and as a board.
And basically, WSBA, WASA, everybody is definitely backing keeping the block grant. And one thing, and Sally can correct me if I misunderstood this, but on House Bill 89, where it talks about that is how they figure your allotment. That still goes into a block model. So they're just going to say, okay, we're going to cut half of your allotment for activities, but then you decide if that's enough or if you want to move money from somewhere else into activities. It's still in the block philosophy. So I think that's pretty safe.
Yeah, and so, the thing that the legislature doesn't understand is just because they cut a specific area of the model doesn't mean that you as the board are going to cut that area in your district. Because it is a block model, you can decide that I want to keep activities in my district, so I'm not going to fund something else. I don't know what to throw out there specifically for you, but you can say, well, we're gonna dip into our cash carryover. That's another thing they don't understand is that when they're talking about the 15%, they're talking about reserves. And the 15% is not a reserve, it's the carryover from one year to another. It's not something that we're hiding holding in the savings account. It's just how much we can carry over from one year to the next. And so they're not understanding the distinction between a reserve and something that you're hiding holding away in a savings account and what you're carrying from one year to the next. That 15% is our cash carryover. So if you have the ability to explain that to a legislator, please do, because they're not understanding that. And they talked about raising that reserve limit from 15 to 25%. Well, that would help us because this past year, because of our revenue that came in from June that came in July, we did go over our 15% by like $170,000 that they're going to reduce our entitlement payment by that amount. So if they'd had the cash carryover limit set at 25%, that 16% wouldn't have mattered. But we were at 16% of our cash carryover instead of 15%. Because I didn't have the formula to remember to calculate that June revenue that comes in July, that they count towards that year's revenues. I won't do that, I promise. But we did have to pay some back, but we had extra money last year. Quote unquote, extra money. Okay?
That's not the worst.
Yeah, so I think it says, it bodes well for us to have, to say, well, we sent money back to you, what are you complaining about? Yeah, that's not a bad thing.
Talking about increasing the cash carryover limit?
They've talked about it, and there've been a couple of bills, drafts that have come through the, education committee to raise it to 20 or 25%, but they haven't gone any farther. They've talked about it, but I haven't seen anything come through to the official legislation, to the floor. But yeah, they've talked about it, but they don't understand that it's not reserves, it's carried. I don't know why that's so hard to understand, because we do have our depreciation reserve, which is really a reserve, is a savings account, but the limit is on the carryover. Soapbox done, okay.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. I'm gonna adjourn the work session and whoever's on Bill's committee.
In the white room.